employees, because that's really going to come back and bite us into the future. We will have an immediate, if you like, response at the moment for crisis, but further down the track, things are really still going to be quite tough. That's going to come back to us. The duty of care, that's very much needs to be a focus for you today as well. And then really looking at sustainability and sustainability of your business. Thank you.
So we just want to quickly put in this latest news slide. You might have heard on the radio at about 2 hours ago, the government is giving a $7.50 per week wage subsidy. And I don't know how that's going to work yet, but in a few moments, we'll be talking about terminations and redundancies, a lot of which have already happened, unfortunately, but that might be an option for you if you need to get that subsidy, and your accountant or bookkeeper is a great resource to ask, or we'll find out for you and keep you updated.
Yeah, thank you, Serena. We will be sending out an email to everybody. We've got all your emails, so you in fact get these notes as well as anything else that we have got in terms of information. So obviously, management is actually about control. If you actually think you manage something, you actually control something. So one of the first issues that you'll face is the workers' safety, health and safety right now. So we mentioned duty of care beforehand. And that you really need to be thinking about your short-term staffing, because you can still get dollars in the door today, but also really looking at your long-term as well. And the decisions you make today will have a long-term impact. So we really need to look at how do you have the staff again to build your business when we get through this crisis at the moment. So we've got lots of business closures happening. We've got supply issues potentially. We've got different impacts on our business, different people who aren't coming into our business or aren't related to our business anymore or won't relate to our business anymore, got different levels of customs. So one of the things I've been involved in straight away with some businesses has been scenario planning, really looking at different levels of business, looking at your clients, what you can expect, and looking also to at perhaps the waves of this crisis. I'm going to call it a crisis because in fact I believe it actually is a crisis. You also really have to look at what are your employment models at the moment and the laws, and this is what we're going to unpack with you today. What can you do? What can you do within the laws? So first of all, you really have to be acting like you've got someone, perhaps even yourself, whatever, thinking about that you in fact have got people in your business right now with this COVID-19. And what safety measures have you got in place? Under the OH&S legislation, you are responsible for the welfare of your employees while they're in the workforce. So in the past, it might have been a crook back or something else like that you might have had to be careful of and have safety measures for. Now, obviously, we've got these major issues. So hygiene, the processes you use, putting people into different work zones, having roles assigned to people, maybe sometimes additional roles or alternative roles. These are really some ways to actually help if you're continuing with business at the moment. We've got another slide coming up with some other processes as well. Now, if we can just go back, sorry, Serena. So then there's also work from home, but that's not actually applicable to all roles, we know that. And some people are in fact closing down already. So you do go back to your scenario planning as your options for looking at the future and some of the triggers actually that you need to be looking for and use. Thank you. So it's a bit of an iterative process, okay? One thing leads to the other. If you can ensure safety of your staff, well, then you can continue working. You should be putting in place some safety controls because of the nature of the transference being, community to community member at the moment. A lot of businesses have gone to work from home straight away, and hopefully you've done that with whoever you've been able to do that within your business at the moment. And I mean, if it's a role and you've got the technologies that you can actually do that. One of the other things that you might need to look at is, do you need to do stand down? Is that actually needed? And what are the entitlements that staff actually have available to them that you can actually use. And I've got down the bottom there, you'll see this is actually all going to happen within the environment where the Fair Work Act is still in place. It's not actually changing the Fair Work Act. So all of the employment laws that you've had in the past, if you like, still stay in place, except for a few modifications that in awards, and Serena will take us through that. There are government mandated actions that need to happen in businesses, some businesses more than others, and you don't have a choice with that, it's mandated. But in amongst all of this also is discrimination legislation. So we have to make sure that whatever decisions and processes and strategies we put into place, that we're not discriminating inadvertently or whatever against some sectors of the community. So I mentioned that there were some ideas about infection control. Now, these infection control strategies are obviously for businesses that are still running, that are actually open for business at the moment. And these are all examples of strategies that have been put into place. They're practical examples, and they're in administration, they're in warehouse, they're in a range of different businesses. And I put these in here for you today so that you can look at those and assess whether or not they're applicable to your business. Other things I've seen is, and I saw it in Woolworths too, but even in another business where they had lines on the floor for where people could actually go, customers could actually go, and staff. So that whole area, that concept of zoning work, and zoning where people can go to make sure of social distancing is also another option for you as well. Have a look at those and see whether or not you've, I suppose, if these are applicable to your workplace, and see, because when I look at those, there's not a lot that I can see that wouldn't apply to quite a broad scope of businesses. Thank you. Many places, as I've mentioned, have gone to work from home. The boom for that is just, well, it actually shot off a couple of weeks ago. I know in workplaces where I'm a HR consultant, it was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago that we started looking at all of the IT infrastructure, etc. And IT people have been, I know, very much under the pump getting this all organised. So you need actually to have a policy in place about work from home. What is it? Who can do it? When? How? Etc. You need an agreement with your employees. You need to have that in place in a written format. You need to do a risk assessment, because any workplace, wherever it is, will need to have a risk assessment done for it. Now, these 3 documents, if you like, I've got those and I can provide those to you in template form as part of a package. I'll talk about that later. Obviously, we've talked about IT, and you need to have some trials already done, really, and then some modifications maybe to those structures you've put in place. And some of those structures aren't just the IT structures, it's how do you communicate with everybody, how do you keep everybody on the same team, how do you report what you're doing, etc. So probably 1 to 6 in mature businesses who have already been doing this, they're probably already doing some of those things. Number 6, I didn't actually mention, is about learning. How do you have the skills to actually do work from home, have meetings, etc. Some people are all over that and others are not. So some team learning about all of that, and perhaps should have happened. If it hasn't happened, get some phone calls and get some learning happening online as soon as you can. Points 7, 8 and 9 are probably where we should be at the moment with communications. How do you have communications with all of your team all the time is quite critical at this time. How are you going to have the reporting and monitoring, and what supports do people need? Again, I've got some information for you if that's what you would like. Thank you, Serena. So working from home, you know, I've worked from home for many years. working for different clients, etc. But not a lot of people are so, I suppose, immersed in it as we are now. So it's an unprecedented situation, and really we need to unpack it and explore it jointly between the business and what they need and staff. You need to have in place your agreements. I mentioned before maybe timesheets, etc. You'll need as well. You need timesheets for salaried workers because of the legislation that came out and started in the 1st of March about keeping records of salaried workers for their hours. You need to be thinking about the change of hours that potentially you could have, whether they're more or whether they're less, what the rosters could actually be. You could change some rosters. What is reasonable overtime? All of this needs to be captured in writing. Some of those changes, I've also got some templates for you that you can possibly use. I think though with all of this though, one of the biggest things is that you really need to provide notice and consultation. So letting people know that this is where you think you're going to go, and then getting some feedback from people. With having feedback, you get some very valuable learning from the floor, if you like, instead of just from your own worldview. And that consultation can actually then come up with some really good solutions and strategies for you to implement.
Thanks, Suzanne. The next slide you can see is the Clark's Private Sector Award, and we've put this up for two reasons. Many of you in industries may well be covered by some other technical award or other award, but you may have clerks working in your business, so you may be covered. Your workplace may have more than one award applicable. The second reason we've picked the Clark's Award is the Fair Work Commission has brought out an amendment, a temporary amendment to this award, and it's expected to roll out to other awards probably as we're speaking. It gives much more flexibility for small businesses to adapt their workplace and not be in breach of the award, and it allows for change of duties. It allows you to give lesser duties to more senior staff. It allows you to reduce minimum hours for part-timers. It reduces minimum shifts for casuals and the span of hours. It also allows you to reduce permanent employees' hours to 75%, but you need agreement with the employee. There are new annual or temporary annual leave provisions if your business is closing, and that you can give a direction to take annual leave with 1 week's notice, and a direction potentially for unpaid leave. If you are not closing, then you can direct the employees to take some annual leave. So asking him, rather than doing terminations or redundancies or stand downs, which we'll speak of in a moment, you may want to do that option. Now, having said all that, bear in mind, I often talk to people about their contract of employment, and they say to me, I don't have a contract. What they think that means is a contract in writing. If you have you could have a verbal contract of employment, and that is, you'll come and work for me, I'll pay you X dollars, you'll do this, and these are the hours. That is a contract of employment. So when we're talking about contract of employment, bearing in mind that you have a contract of employment with everybody, even if it's not in writing. If you do have an employment contract in writing, if the provisions or benefits for the employee are greater in that contract, then you have to give them the greater of either the award or the contract. Now, some of you or many of you might be in the hospitality industry. So we just wanted to put this one up. This will probably, as I said before, have a new schedule for flexibility. There are consultation on workplace change requirements in paragraph 8. They're in most awards, not all, but there are some mandated annual leave provisions in that particular award if that applies to you, and if it does, if you're in a cafe, restaurant, hotel industry or whatever, have a look at that award. If you don't know which award you're on, have a look at the Fair Work Ombudsman's website. How easy is that to say? Fair Work Ombudsman's website, award applicability section, or you can ask Suzanne or myself.
Can I just say too, on those awards, when they talk about that you can have a change of duty for an employee, that really gives you some great flexibility, but you do also have to look at the competencies of that person. I've already had a situation where someone was going to do one role, and we've worked out actually, this person cannot do that physically. They've got an issue with a sore back. So emptying containers is not going to be something that they could possibly do. One of the other things is that this is all for your planning to actually think about. This, the flexibilities in the awards will only go until, at the moment, they're saying the 30th of June. So that's something to think about. And the other thing, when Serena just mentioned about the span of hours, so like for the Clark's Award now, and this really fits very well with work from home, and certainly some of the feedback that I've got from people already is that, you know, it's quite possibly a version of hell trying to get some work done when you've got children as well, and depending on their age. So there's they've increased the span of hours from 6 a.m. in the morning until 11 p.m. at night. And for many workplaces, for clerical work, they don't necessarily care when it gets done. So those are some of the things that you would need to actually think about. Moving on to this slide here and best practice processes. First of all, in your business, you should really be looking at your workforce needs. Who is critical? So who is core? And there may be some things that you'll do with that core group as well. Just because they perhaps keep their jobs doesn't necessarily mean that there's not going to be some other impacts as well. You may also look at people who can do other things, which we've just mentioned, or then there's possibly the third group of people who potentially won't be needed or can't be absorbed into the new frameworks for your business. So looking at all of your options for your staff, you really need to, first of all, again, I can't emphasize enough, look at the safety of your employees. You'll also need to look at what are your supply chains like, what are your custom levels like, and what are your financials. And I would encourage you to look at, I know, first of all, probably this next month, it's so fluid, and then maybe look at 3 and 6 months further down the track. I think at 6 months, that's where there's going to be a really big impact, even for those businesses who at the moment are very, very busy. You want to look at the viability of the alternative arrangements. So I'm talking about the financial viability of all of that. And I also, as a HR practitioner, can't emphasize enough the whole communications and consultation processes that you need to have in place. Emails. I'm daily emailing some groups of people just to keep in contact, just to make sure they're aware of what's coming their way, because they've got decisions to make as well. And I want to keep good talent ready for the other side, the flip side, and the resilience and the growth that we're going to have on the other side. So leave entitlements, what can you actually do? And you'll see here on the slide here of the different things that you're actually as an employer would be accountable for. So if your employee is going into isolation and they've been exposed to the coronavirus at your workplace or wherever, but you're responsible, you need to keep paying them regular wages. If they're unable to work from home, if they're able to work from home, you give them regular wages and you set in place the work from home. If they're unfit for work, and this is as it is for any situation, if they're unfit for work because they're sick, it's time for personal leave. We'll talk a little bit about that later as well, unpack that a little bit further. If they're caring for others, well, then it's time for a carer's leave. And again, there's some details around that coming up your way. Some people, though, are choosing not to work, okay? They're feeling, maybe, threatened by it. Maybe their health is threatened by it. Who knows? But if they're choosing not to work, it's actually unpaid or special leave that you can give them. If they're choosing not to work and it's authorised by you, which is different to the previous example, then it's annual leave or unpaid leave for those people. So you'd use annual leave first. If isolation is needed and you're not responsible, maybe they've come back from travelling or goodness knows what, then you're accountable for providing them with some annual leave, whatever's left there. And if that's not available, perhaps looking at if long service leave could be applied, or otherwise unpaid leave. So those are your options, generally. So personal leave is for each employee who's full-time, 10 days each year. It's not applicable to casuals, just to make sure you know that. Within that, there is carers leave of 2 days per occasion. And I don't know if it's 2 days leave per occasion per kid. You'd actually have to look at that, I think, a bit further. There's compassionate leave. Now, compassionate leave is on top of personal leave, and it's 2 days per occasion. I've literally had it where in 1 year, one particular employee took off 8 days, and it was for her father, and he actually never did pass away, but he was particularly sick at those times. On medical leaves, medical certificates, sorry, you can ask for medical certificates, and it's actually, I think, quite critical at this time to ask for medical certificates for when people are returning to work as well. You need to know that personal leave accrues every year. So if you've had people for some time working for you, it won't just be 10 days leave for full time that they're entitled to. I'm just mentioning full-time, part-time is pro rata for part-time people, okay? So casuals are not paid personal leave, but they can have that time unpaid, okay? Thank you. So one of the biggest things I think is, I mentioned before, is about consultation. So there are some rules in place, but I think consultation helps, well, everything, move smoothly actually, and for you to actually achieve the outcomes you're looking for. Serena mentioned the annual leave, that can perhaps, you can look at doing that yourself with agreement of your employees. So they take it either at 100% whatever they've got, or maybe they can extend that period of time. There's lots of places where you can do that. But if you do that with consultation and agreement, off you go. It could be a very good outcome for everybody. In Victoria, people are entitled to take long service leave after they've had 7 years of continuous employment. So, and again, you might want to think about, is that at 50%, and then you can actually extend the period of time. Then otherwise, if those two don't apply, you could use personal leave, but that's only if it's relevant. So that's only actually if someone's actually ill or the carer's leave. Other than that, then you might just look at unpaid leave. And I have an agreement for you too in the bunch of templates that I have for getting some agreement around unpaid leave. I've greyed out there the stand down or the redundancy because I'm going to pass that over, and but those are the next two options on I suppose the iterative type of list of looking at what leave entitlements or leave arrangements you should put into place. Rightio. So the government has put some boundaries around what stand down is. Now, stand down has not changed in the Fair Work Act. It's actually for when there are emergencies, crises that happen that are outside of a business's control. The examples they use do not mention coronavirus or any pandemics, but I believe that it's pretty well a test case here that it would actually apply. It also applies, stand down does also apply to businesses that have been closed by the government by direction, or if the self-quarantine ratio is so, I suppose, extensive that the employees who are left in the business can't actually be useful. The stoppage of work really probably spoke more to the crisis concept of bushfires, etc., that we were talking about before, but it's actually about being outside of the control of the employer, no matter what that is. So it's not quite as clear-cut as you would think. What happens with stand down is that the employment is not actually ended, so it can be picked up again. and that entitlements actually still continue to accrue. So I might be on stand down for 8 weeks, but all my other entitlements still accrue. The biggest thing I think, again, with stand down is to, again, notify people, consult with people, check your awards, and then look at, can you possibly use some other alternatives before you get to stand down? Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Just to check through the stand down provisions, section 524, being a lawyer here, as Suzanne said, it is a stoppage that there's not for which the employer is not responsible, and where the employee can no longer be usefully employed. It is not generally considered to apply to a general downturn of work. So if you are a business that's suffering a 15% reduction in your turnover at this time, then that would not be something that, generally speaking, would justify a stand down. And as Suzanne said, the entitlements keep running. So it's a good option, but it's not perfect, because all of the accrual of entitlements is still happening while the person is on stand or down. So the test really, from a legal perspective, is, can the employee be usefully employed? Now, these came out of industrial relations decisions, but I think the accepted view is that, as Suzanne said, it would apply in this current pandemic situation.
Okay, so I think you would have got the message by now that consultation really is a very useful tool to actually use. So don't just make decisions. You may have even thought you've made a decision, okay, but then consult with your staff about that. Make sure that your decision is actually justifiable, and make sure that it's recorded. So this is actually about having written records. When you're thinking about your decisions that you have to make individually, I know we're all running very different, unique businesses. Think about what you're going to do with people who are currently sick. You've got to be very careful about discrimination. You've got to be very careful that your decisions aren't seen as being harsh and unreasonable. Therefore, go back to your consultation and the notification, etc. And this actually takes a bit of time. So think about the time frames that you need to have as well ahead of the game. Redundancies, the processes there and the entitlements are the same as always. And Serena will be talking about that as well. The notice periods and entitlements, that's the same as normal. Same as the small business exemptions are the same as normal as well. So this may, well, there's a heck of a lot of people who are working in businesses of less than 15 employees. So that actually will save those businesses redundancy packages that they'll have to put together, but you'll still actually be liable for notice periods and some other entitlements. Serena.
Thanks, Suzanne. So we've put up on the screen here the redundancy pay entitlements. Bear in mind, as Suzanne said, that a small business employee, as defined by the Act, does not have to pay this amount. This amount is in addition to the notice period. We'll get to the notice period in a second. If after all that consultation and exploring annual leave and long service and flexible work, and if you believe that redundancy is the only option for some of your staff or all of them, then the important thing is to do it correctly. So you have to pay either this minimum that's shown here, or what's in your contract of employment, if you have one, or the award, whichever is the greater. Most awards incorporate this structure here that's being shown to you now. Remember, you have a small business employer exemption. You don't have to pay this amount, but you've still got to do the redundancy correctly. And with all employment laws, the biggest takeaway you take from this is it's not only what you can do, it's that you do it correctly. So I can't stress that enough. So if it's still a redundancy, even if the small business exemption applies, it's still a redundancy and it still has to be handled properly, and redundancy must be genuine and supportable. So even if it's a one-pager, I've said to my employers, you know, have a look at your business and estimate your downturn of work. Look at what your business flowchart will look like going forward. And then if you're called upon to support your decision to make a redundancy, you've got something there that can justify. Now, you don't have to be a good employee, you don't even have to be a good business person, but you just have to have a genuine plan going forward to use the redundancy provisions. So you also, if you're making somebody redundant, you also need to pay these minimum notice periods. They can work these notice periods or they can be paid out. So now, just bear in mind the normal unfair dismissal provisions, the normal general protections provisions still apply. So, for example, if it's a genuine redundancy but you don't do it correctly, you might face an unfair dismissal claim. So be very careful how you terminate and do it right, and then you shouldn't have any problems. And so I guess Suzanne can talk to this as well. The key points from we'd like to stress to you are: use the award provisions and the Fair Work Act, use them very wisely. They are there, but if they're not used properly, you could get yourself in trouble. Your normal duties to your employees are still there. OH&S, discrimination, all of that stuff still applies. Unfair dismissals, all of that still applies. You need to adapt your workforce to the current situation. As I said, the Fair Work Commission won't double dish you on business strategy, but it will look at your procedure. So in regard to employment contracts, remember I said earlier on that they can be verbal. Remember that they can be varied by consent, pretty much, as long as they still comply with the law. If you have an employee and you consult with them, as Suzanne's been pressing, and you agree on a variation, then great, go away and put that into course. Document and plan your decision-making process so that your decisions are supportable if tested in the future. Nobody can say, for example, that your redundancy is genuine if you can show that you had a business case for doing it. But if you just picked randomly, someone might allege, for example, that was discriminatory. And seek advice specific to your industry and your employees, because all of your awards are a little bit different. Suzanne, do you have anything you'd like to say on that?
No, I think that's pretty well summarised. I think out of it all, though, the critical things is the planning ahead, know what you want to do, have the consultation, listen to what comes back to you from your employees. They may have some really good ideas. Yeah, your point really there, Serena, is about that process. Have that in place and have that documented, because I think what we're seeing now is just the tip of the iceberg, actually, of the crisis, if you like. But we're going to see more hurt as people suffer financially further down the track, and then they're going to be looking at ways to perhaps recoup what they see as maybe one of their entitlements that you might have left the gate undone, and so therefore they'll be looking for avenues to get some money. They'll be in pain. So yeah, so you need to back yourself in here and be very clear on what you're doing and document it all. Thank you very much. My business is Performance Advantage. We are a scalable HR plug-in service for small businesses, and we've been running for about 20 years. We've helped a lot of industries, and I've got those up there listed. A huge proportion of them are local, and you'll see there that I have got different packages for different businesses, but I don't really want to push that at all at the moment. I'm much more interested in just making sure that businesses have got some of the resources that they need to get done what they need to get done in a protective and proactive way. So I have got together a package of letters, templates for you about maybe a notice of potential redundancy, changing employment conditions, unpaid leave, stand down. I've got working from home policies, checklists, and also a risk assessment. Those are available to any of you today. I will be sending out some details from email. I just want to make sure you've got what you need so that your foot isn't in a noose later on. Thank you. And thank you for your attention today too.
Thanks, Suzanne. Suzanne and I are happy to take emails or calls on any of this. Happy to talk to you without any obligation.
Absolutely.
You know, we just love small businesses. You're the backbone of the economy, and we want to help support you. So please take down our emails. And I'd like to know. I would like to thank Geo from Yarra Valley. Is it Shire of Yarra Valley?
Tourism, Yarra Valley Tourism.
Yeah, and for doing the tech for us today. And I believe she is monitoring any questions that might be there.
We've only had one question, which was asking about the PowerPoint being available.
Yes, it certainly will be, and I'll send it out to everybody, and hopefully that will be today.
Great. Any other questions, just email us. Thank you for attending. Look after yourselves, and yeah, thanks for attending our webinar.
Thank you.